The file that hit my desk early that morning arrived at exactly 6 in the morning, and the impact was hard enough that my coffee almost tipped over, and when I looked up, I saw Colonel Harrison standing above me with an expression that told me this was not a normal day, and definitely not a normal assignment, and the quiet way he said my name made the tension in my stomach pull tight. And before I could ask anything, he told me to come straight to the conference room and to bring absolutely no one with me, and that warning alone told me that whatever this was had already climbed far beyond the usual level of classified work, and after serving under him for 3 years, including 2 tours in Afghanistan and countless operations, I had never seen him this shaken, not even when we lost a convoy outside Kandahar, or when command tore into us after that tragic friendly fire mess, and that memory alone weighed on me as I followed him down the hall. And when he locked the conference room door, the click of metal froze the air around me because officers did not lock doors for routine briefings. And inside I found 3 men in suits who clearly belonged to some federal agency, although they kept their badges hidden. A woman from Army Intelligence whom I recognized from previous briefings, but never worked with directly, and Major Brooks from Special Operations, looking as though he had not slept in days. And before I could sit, Harrison said I was about to be read into something that did not leave this room, and he slid over an agreement thicker than my divorce papers. And I signed it without reading a single line, because at my level you do not question orders, and you do not stall when the atmosphere is this heavy. And the woman from Intelligence pulled up a map of eastern Kentucky deep in the Appalachian wilderness, and she pointed to a red circle, marking a location called Copper Creek, which I had never heard of. And then she explained that a geological survey team had vanished there 3 weeks earlier with no alerts, no emergency signals, no final communications, simply silence and gone. And although people vanish in mountain country all the time, no one assembled a panel like this for missing hikers. And then she showed a photo taken from a satellite, and my stomach tightened because the angle showed what should have been an abandoned mining town left to rot since 1978, yet instead there were complete buildings, patched roofs, clear roads, and even vehicles that did not belong to any ghost settlement. And then Brooks spoke in a tired, gravelly voice, saying their thermal view showed around 40 warm bodies inside that settlement, even though according to every federal, state, and county record, absolutely no one was supposed to be living there. And Harrison leaned forward and added that the last message from the missing survey team mentioned recent digging work done with professional skill, far more advanced than anything expected from trespassers, wanderers. And then another man in a suit said they believed this strange settlement might tie into a string of thefts from military convoys over the past 18 months, including weapons, communication gear, and survival equipment, all taken inside a 200-mile ring surrounding this area. The idea that someone built a fort out there hit me like ice, and I asked if they believed it was a militia, but Harrison simply said they did not know, and that was the problem, and that was why a small team was being sent for reconnaissance. Only observe, do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Locate the survey team if alive and confirm what was happening inside Copper Creek. And then the intelligence officer displayed our personnel list and told me I would take Sergeants Jackson and Thompson from my own unit, plus Specialist Rodriguez from Signals and Corporal Reeves from Medical Forming, a 5-person stealth team set to deploy the next evening. And when I asked about the rushed timetable, Brooks said the situation was escalating, and then he told us a state trooper had reported strange lights near the town 2 nights ago before disappearing, and only his burned cruiser had been found on a logging road. And that detail made the whole room fall silent, because when law enforcement vanishes inside your own country, you know something dark is brewing. And Harrison concluded the briefing by reminding me that I had experience in mountain terrain overseas, and that this would not be entirely different, except these mountains were our own, and whoever was out there should not be there. And after the meeting, he pulled me aside and quietly said that there was more to this mission than he could reveal, and that people far above him were watching, and that I needed to be extremely careful because the Appalachian wilderness had a way of swallowing the unwary. And those words clung to me through the rest of the day. As I assembled, my team briefed them and studied every map, photo, and scrap of history about the old mining town that had died after a collapse took 15 lives and forced the company to abandon it. And yet somehow someone had brought it back from the dead and built something new in the shadows of those old ridges. And as dusk fell, I finished checking our gear, our routes, our contingencies, and when I finally lay down to rest, sleep never came, because once you are Handed a mission like this, you feel the weight of the unknown sitting on your chest. And in those hours before dawn, all I could think about was that tomorrow night we would be walking into a place that by every official record did not exist, and that whatever waited for us inside those mountains had already claimed more than a few lives, and was clearly ready to take more. We spent 2 long hours watching the hidden settlement from the ridgeline, carefully measuring guard rotations, and studying every faint movement inside the shadows. And the more we observed, the more obvious it became that whoever occupied Copper Creek was disciplined, experienced, and trained far better than any group of wanderers or survival hobbyists, because their patrols moved with precision, their lighting patterns were structured, their radio checks were perfectly timed, and everything about their behavior shouted organization rather than chaos. And as we tracked their shift change at midnight, where 6 guards replaced another 6 with clean timing, it became clear these people followed procedures that echoed military routes. And while we watched, Reeves tapped my shoulder and pointed to a building near the northwest corner where a red roof stood out against the dark, because we saw guards bringing trays through its entrance, and unlike other buildings, these guards faced inward instead of outward, which told us they were not protecting something from outsiders, they were keeping someone or something trapped inside. And I felt certainty rise in my chest that the missing geological survey team had been imprisoned there, and the next move became obvious, because if we wanted answers we needed to get closer. So I turned to Rodriguez and asked if he could bypass the sensors, and he studied the lay, outcounted guard patterns, and finally said there was possibly a drainage ditch deep enough to crawl under the infrared beams, but he warned it was only a maybe, and I told him that in our line of work, nothing was guaranteed anyway. And after another hour of waiting for the lowest activity window, we began our infiltration plan, and I assigned Thompson to remain on the ridge at Overwatch with instructions to cover our retreat if the worst happened, and he settled in with his rifle, while the rest of us descended through dark forest toward the fence that circled the town. And as we moved lower, the tree line ended, leaving a stretch of open ground, so we slipped into the drainage ditch, which was cold, wet, and filled with decades of rust and stagnant runoff, and the stink of iron and old earth clung to our gear. But the ditch did its job, keeping us below the beam line of the active infrared sensors Rodriguez had detected with his handheld scanner. And as we crawled, elbows slicing through mud, knees grinding on rough concrete, we stayed silent even when a guard walked directly above us and kicked a rock into the ditch, where it landed inches from Reeves' hand, and none of us breathed until he passed. And once we reached the small culvert running beneath the fence, we pushed through into the heart of the compound, emerging in the shadow of an old equipment shed, now repurposed but still strong enough to cover our movement. And from that point we needed to approach the prisoner building quietly and carefully, and circling behind it felt like navigating through a sleeping beast, because the compound was not entirely still. There were faint voices, a generator hum, and a few lights in distant windows, but no one seemed aware of us. And at the back of the building, we found a locked door, and Reeves used bolt cutters to snap the padlock with a metallic pop that sounded far louder than it should have, yet no alarm came, and we slipped inside, moving through a narrow hallway with doors on each side. And as I checked rooms one by one, the first was empty, the second held supplies, and the third held terrified shapes huddled against a wall. And when one of them moved toward me, I covered his mouth and whispered that we were United States Army and here to help. And he nodded quickly, saying his team of 7 had been trapped for 3 weeks, while the people of this compound waited for someone named Morrison to decide their fate. And we gathered the remaining civilians, each of them exhausted, shaken, and hungry, yet alive and able to walk. And one woman still carried a geologist hammer on her belt, even though she had been locked up for weeks. And the sight of that quiet, stubborn strength struck me harder than I expected. And she told us they had been studying a newly discovered cavern deep in the mine before these people captured them, and that the camp became paranoid after discovering some kind of underground system that should not have existed, and they brought in strange equipment and specialists she had never seen before, and whatever they found, it scared them enough to lock all witnesses away. And hearing this only deepened the dread inside me, because the mission was no longer about missing workers or stolen supplies. Something larger was taking shape, and it was buried under the very ground we stood on. But we had no time to think about it, because I had to move the civilians to safety, and Reeves checked the hall before we stepped out. But barely halfway through the compound, bright floodlights roared alive, bathing everything in blinding white, and voices shouted commands telling us not to move, and it became clear instantly that we had walked into a trap because red beams dotted our chests coming from rifles hidden in every shadow, and we were surrounded on all sides. And then an older man stepped forward with the posture of someone born to command, and though he wore civilian clothes, he carried himself like a seasoned officer, and he introduced himself simply as Morrison, and told us to lower our weapons because we were outnumbered and outgunned, and the calm way he spoke made the situation even more dangerous because calm leaders do not bluff. And before I could reply, he explained that he knew exactly who we were, how many of us had entered the valley, and even that our sniper on the ridge could not call for help because they had been jamming our radios since we crossed their perimeter, and Rodriguez confirmed it with a small shake of his head. And Morrison said he wanted 1 hour of our time to show us what they had uncovered inside the mine, and then we could decide whether to fight them or leave with the civilians, and every instinct told me this offer was a trap, but every tactical fact told me we had no winning move except to hear him out, and Jackson whispered that this whole situation felt like madness, but we had no way to shoot our way out, so I accepted the hour with the condition that the civilians were not harmed, and Morrison agreed and led us deeper into the compound toward the mine entrance where the air felt colder and heavier, as if the mountain itself was waiting for us. And as we descended, I had no idea that next hour would shatter every truth I believed about our world and about human history. Morrison walked ahead of us into the mine with the steady confidence of someone who believed completely in what he was about to reveal, and even though my pulse hammered in my ears, I followed with my team close behind, and the civilians remained under guard as agreed, and the deeper we moved, the more obvious it became that this mine had been transformed far beyond its original purpose, because the support beams were replaced with modern steel, the walls were reinforced, the lighting was industrial grade, and the airflow felt regulated as if someone had installed a full ventilation system. And when we stepped onto an old rail cart platform, Morrison signaled for his men to activate it, and the cart shuddered to life, carrying us deeper into the mountain where the air grew colder and heavier, and the rock around us slowly shifted colors, moving from coal black to pale limestone, then into something I did not recognize at all. And Morrison spoke while we descended, explaining that the old coal mine had broken into a deeper natural system in 1978. And the company sealed it rather than report what they had found because the 15 miners who died in that so-called collapse were not killed by falling rock, but by the shock of breaking into a space that should not have existed. And he said that after years of research, his people had discovered that this cave system did not match anything on geological charts and had no known formation pattern, and the more he talked, the more the air filled with a strange weight, as if the mountain itself was listening. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, the tunnel widened and opened into a vast cavern lit by towers of industrial lights set up by Morrison and his people, and the sight that greeted us stole the breath out of my lungs because the space was filled with structures carved directly from the mountain stone, yet shaped in styles that resembled nothing in human history. And at first my mind rejected the shapes because the angles seemed wrong, the proportions twisted, and the lines bent in ways that made my eyes struggle to understand. And Morrison told us that carbon testing suggested this place was older than 10,000 years, far older than any known civilization on this continent, and possibly older than civilizations anywhere. And then he guided us toward a cluster of equipment where I saw strange metal tools, crystalline fragments, and a collection of artifacts that looked both engineered and utterly alien to human understanding, though he insisted none of this was related to extraterrestrial theories, because in his words the truth was far stranger and far older, and he said that these discoveries proved that humanity was not the first advanced society to rise on Earth, and that our history had been erased by time and disaster only to be rewritten by later generations. And I tried to ground myself by focusing on what I could see, touch, or measure, but every direction I turned revealed something that defied explanation. And Rodriguez bent over a console reading strange signals and said the electromagnetic levels were impossible, far beyond anything a natural cave should produce, and that something in the cavern was generating power in controlled pulses. And when Morrison brought us deeper into the chamber, he revealed the source of those readings, a spherical object hovering over a carved pedestal, turning slowly and smoothly in open air with no visible support. And its surface was covered in shifting symbols similar to the carvings on the walls, but more fluid, as if the sphere itself was thinking and responding to our presence. And Morrison called it the heart and said that it had been active for as long as they had monitored it, and perhaps much longer. And when he stepped close, the sphere brightened, and the symbols rotated faster, and a low vibration filled the cavern, settling deep in my chest like a slow heartbeat echoing within miles of stone. And he said the sphere reacted to human proximity, and sometimes projected shapes and patterns that resembled maps or equations far beyond their understanding, and other times projected what looked like warnings, though no one could decipher them. And as I stared into the glowing surface, I felt a cold sense of recognition, as if the sphere was aware of us, not simply as bodies in its presence, but as things it had been waiting for. And Jackson whispered beside me that this was bigger than any mission we had ever imagined, and Rodriguez confirmed that the readings made no sense because this sphere produced no heat, no radiation, no detectable energy output, yet powered itself with strength equal to a small reactor. And Reeves kept his distance, studying the carvings instead, and noting that the patterns repeated in sequences like a written language. And Morrison said they had already translated fragments and believed the carvings referenced an age before known history, with warnings of deep earth structures collapsing after some catastrophe. And when I asked how many people knew about this place, Morrison answered that only the 42 members of his compound and now us had seen it, and that they had spent 2 years documenting everything they could and mapping at least 12 miles of passages, and speculated that the full network might stretch under multiple states. And he said some passages were safe while others twisted in ways that caused hallucinations or disorientation. And 3 of his people had died in those deeper chambers, and others had been injured, including a man named Chen, who had temporarily lost his sanity. And I felt a rising dread because this place felt more alive than buried, more aware than ancient. And Morrison finished by saying that this was not a threat in the traditional sense, but a revelation of what humanity once was and what it might become again. And he said that the government would bury this truth just as previous sites had been buried in the past, and that he and his people intended to protect this knowledge until they could reveal it properly to the world. And as I stared at the heart turning slowly above the pedestal, I felt the impossible weight of standing inside a story far older than any country, any soldier, or any war. And for the first time in my career, I did not know whether the mission I had been sent to complete still made sense, or whether the truth in front of me demanded something entirely different. Rodriguez stood near one of the consoles, staring at its readouts with growing confusion as the strange signals surrounding the hovering sphere pulsed in long, slow waves. And he said the energy patterns were not random at all, but formed a repeating heartbeat that occurred only once every 12 hours. And Morrison explained that these pulses somehow linked to tidal movements, even though we were hundreds of miles inland and buried thousands of feet underground. And he said this cavern system seemed connected to forces far older and larger than anything modern science could explain. And hearing that made my skin crawl, because the idea that something inside a mountain reacted to the ocean felt like a truth meant for a different kind of world. And I forced myself back to mission thinking by reminding Morrison that no matter what we were seeing here, the civilians needed to be released, and the stolen military property needed to be returned. But he pushed back, saying the ordinary rules did not matter anymore, because what lay inside this cavern changed everything humanity thought it understood. And he said that political systems, military chains, and national boundaries meant nothing compared to the discovery under our feet. And when I reminded him that he had created an armed settlement on United States soil, he laughed bitterly and said the country he once served had abandoned him and many like him, and that the people living in Copper Creek were veterans who had been forgotten by the very government they had fought to protect. And he said they had given their lives to a nation that offered nothing in return. And when they found this ancient place filled with impossible structures and unknown technology, they had finally found purpose again. And he said the community here was not an army, but a home for those who needed meaning and direction. And the more he spoke, the more conflicted I felt, because although his reasoning did not excuse kidnapping or theft, his belief in the significance of the discovery was absolute. And as he talked, Jackson wandered deeper into the cavern, shining his light across the distant walls and calling for us to join him, because he had found something we had not noticed before. And we followed him until we reached a vast central floor that seemed carved with careful geometric patterns resembling enormous circuit boards etched into stone. And in The middle of that carved platform we found something even more impossible than the first sphere, for resting on a raised pedestal floated a larger sphere nearly 3 feet in diameter, and its surface shimmered like metal that had mined light itself from the earth, and the symbols across its face shifted in waves that looked like breathing language, and it rotated slowly without any visible force holding it aloft. And as we stood before it, Morrison said they called it the heart because it seemed to power everything in the cavern, and he said it had been active for as long as they had monitored it, and possibly for thousands of years before that. And the moment he stepped closer, the symbols accelerated, and the low vibration in the air deepened and spread through our bones until it felt like the entire cavern exhaled around us. And Morrison said this artifact recognized human presence and responded as if aware, and that sometimes it projected lights that resembled star clusters or mathematical structures far beyond anything known, and that sometimes it showed shapes that looked like warnings, but no one could decipher them. And Rodriguez moved closer with a handheld sensor and said the electromagnetic field around the heart exceeded anything he had ever measured, and that it produced no heat, no radiation, and no decay, yet somehow generated power greater than a nuclear reactor, and that this defied every law of physics we relied upon. And Morrison explained that the cavern held 17 additional artifacts, though none as powerful or active as the heart. And I stared at the sphere until vertigo tugged at me, because the longer I watched, the more I felt something behind its glow, like a presence observing us. And when I turned away, the walls around me seemed to shift slightly, as if the structure of the cavern resisted being fully understood. And Morrison urged me to notice the carvings near the floor, where repeating symbols formed patterns like stories. And he said they had begun translation work with primitive outlines hinting at catastrophe and collapse, followed by rebuilding cycles older than recorded time. And he said the ancients who carved this place warned of something, and that the warning repeated in every connected passage. And the weight of these revelations felt enormous, pressing into the deepest part of my mind until it became difficult to focus on the mission at all. But I forced myself to return to duty and told Morrison we had to leave because my sniper reported vehicles approaching the compound. And Morrison did not seem surprised and said the federal response had arrived sooner than expected and that our time was nearly gone. And he asked me what I planned to tell them, because whatever I said in my report would determine whether this ancient knowledge reached the world or disappeared into a classified vault forever. And he told me that if the government seized this place, they would bury it as they had buried discoveries like it in the past, and that humanity would lose its chance to learn the truth about its origins and about the cycles that shaped our history. And Morrison stepped before me and asked me directly if I believed people deserved to know the truth, or if I would allow the government to silence it. And my team stood behind me listening, and each of them silently weighed the same question. And Jackson whispered that what we saw here changed everything, and Rodriguez said the readings alone would rewrite scientific understanding, and that burying this would be a crime against progress. And Reeves said nothing but kept taking photos as if documenting every inch before it vanished. And after a long moment, I told Morrison that we would take the civilians and leave, and that I would decide what to put in my report after thinking through everything we had seen. And Morrison accepted that answer and said it was all he could ask, and that whatever choice I made would shape the future. And he warned that if the government tried to seize the discovery, they would resist because this place had given them purpose, and they would die before giving it up. And then we rode the rail cart back toward the surface in heavy silence, with the knowledge that we were leaving one world behind and stepping back into another that now felt far less real than the ancient chambers waiting beneath the mountain. When the rail cart finally reached the upper levels of the mine, the cold air from outside hit us like a reminder that the world above still existed, even though everything we had witnessed in the depths felt older, stronger, and more real than anything waiting under daylight. And as we stepped into the open, we saw the entire compound alive with frantic movement, because Morrison had already alerted his people that federal units were closing in, and they were preparing defensive positions with a level of discipline that belonged not to desperate criminals, but to trained veterans who understood the exact weight of what was coming. And yet there was no panic, only grim purpose, as if they had accepted that protecting the ancient discovery beneath the mountain might cost them everything. And Morrison kept his word and released the 7 civilian surveyors to us without hesitation. And he told me we had only minutes before the approaching forces reached the edge of Copper Creek, and urged me to re-establish communication, which Rodriguez confirmed was possible now that we were outside the immediate jamming field. And when I called in the update, Harrison responded almost instantly asking if all civilians were accounted for, and I confirmed 7 souls alive and able to move, and I said the situation was complex but currently contained, and requested that approaching units stand down, and I could hear the confusion in his brief pause as he asked what I meant by complex, but I did not have time to explain an ancient civilization buried beneath the Appalachians, or a glowing sphere older than recorded history, or a militia of veterans willing to die to protect something humanity was not prepared to understand. So I simply told him a full debrief would follow upon extraction, and that there was no immediate threat, and he accepted that answer with hesitation, and confirmed that helicopters and support were inbound, and I hung up knowing I had just placed myself in the center of a storm that would not stop once this operation was analyzed by people far above my rank. And as we waited for extraction team, the noise of engines reached us first, followed by the soft glow of landing lights moving over the tree line, and the sight of military aircraft cutting through the dusk made the reality of our return sink in, because we were leaving the mountain, but the mountain was not leaving us. And at the same time, federal agents in armored vehicles surged into the settlement surrounding the buildings and disarming the inhabitants, while Morrison stood calmly in the middle of it all with the quiet acceptance of a man who understood the consequences long before they arrived. And when they placed restraints on him, he did not resist and did not mention a single word about the artifacts or the caverns below or the civilization he believed he was protecting. And as we boarded the helicopter with the civilians, I saw that several members of his community had slipped away into the forest, blending into the mountains that had shaped them, and I knew instantly that these people would not be captured or silenced, because many among them had lived in these ridges long before their return to Copper Creek, and could disappear for years without leaving a trace. And during the flight out, my team sat in heavy silence, because none of us were ready to speak about what we had seen, and none of us had any clue what the military and federal investigators would do when they realized we had given them only the surface-level truth. And back at Fort Campbell, we were rushed into debriefings that lasted hours, with officials demanding information about the compound, its weapons, its structure, and its leadership. And I told them everything about the kidnapping, the stolen equipment, the fortified town, the guard movements, and the recovered civilians, but I did not mention a single word about the ancient structures carved in impossible angles, or the cavern filled with artifacts that broke the laws of physics, or the hovering sphere that pulsed like the heartbeat of a forgotten world. And my team followed my lead without hesitation, because none of us trusted what would happen if this secret reached the hands of those who would classify it, erase it, or bury it under concrete forever. And after the official statements were taken, we were dismissed to rest, though rest was impossible because everything I had seen replayed behind my eyes whenever I closed them. And 3 weeks later, an encrypted message arrived on my secure device from an unknown source, and when I opened it, I found an ocean of digital recordings, scans, artifact logs, field notes, measurement readings, map outlines, symbol translations, and image files, all collected by Morrison and his community for over 2 years, documenting every inch of the ancient cavern system. And contained within those files was proof, the kind that could not be ignored, could not be denied, and could not be dismissed by any government simply looking to bury the truth. And the message with it held a single line: the truth wants to be free. Your choice whether it stays alive or dies. And I sat there staring at the screen for a long time, because I knew this was not just a message. It was a passing of responsibility, and a burden heavier than any rucksack I had carried in Afghanistan, because now I held evidence of a civilization older than all recorded human history, a civilization that had mastered energy structures and technologies beyond anything we understood, and one that had been wiped away by an unknown catastrophe, leaving behind warnings carved into stone and devices that still pulsed with impossible power. And as I studied data, I realized that none of the crimes Morrison was charged with, kidnapping, theft, conspiracy, compared to the magnitude of the knowledge he had tried to protect, and that the government would bury this discovery without hesitation if they learned everything, and that if they succeeded, humanity would lose something irreplaceable, something that might determine our future survival. And that night, Rodriguez called me saying he had analyzed more of the sphere readings and found frequencies that matched geological anomalies across the entire Appalachian range. And Jackson reached out saying mineral samples he collected could not be identified by any university, and Reeves reported that the symbol patterns he documented looked like early forms of structured language, unlike anything known, and all of us realized we were sitting on the greatest discovery in human history, and the only people who knew were us and the ones now locked away in federal cells. And the burden of that truth settled over us like the weight of the mountains themselves. My secure phone rang the next morning when the sky was still pale with early light. And when I answered, it was Colonel Harrison speaking in a tone that felt heavier than any official order he had ever given me. And he told me to come to his office immediately and alone, and the drive across base felt like a long walk toward judgment, because there was no part of me that believed this meeting would be routine. And when I stepped inside his office, he did not gesture for me to sit, but simply stared at me for a long moment before lowering himself into his chair as if preparing for something painful. And finally, he told me he had reviewed every after-action report from Copper Creek, and that on the surface they were flawless, precise, and professional, yet something inside them felt intentionally incomplete. And then he added that certain members of my team had been making inquiries beyond what their roles required, asking professors about geology, academics about ancient symbols, specialists about electromagnetic anomalies. And he asked if I wanted to explain why, and before I could form a response, he held up a hand and said this conversation was not being recorded and would remain between soldiers, and that honesty was the only thing that mattered now. And the gravity in his eyes told me he already knew the truth, or at least suspected it, and was giving me one final chance to confirm what he feared. And so I made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff, and I told him everything in full detail: the ancient structures, the impossible technology, the carved warnings, the pulsing sphere that defied all laws of physics, and the vast network of passages stretching under the mountains. And I described the sense of intelligence behind the artifacts, the presence that seemed to watch it through stone and light. And when I finished, Harrison did not speak immediately, but walked to the window and stared at the parade field outside, as if trying to find the courage to reveal something he had carried inside for decades. And then he told me that in the year 1987, he had been a young lieutenant sent with a unit to secure what command had called a downed weather balloon in the Tennessee mountains. But what they actually found was a cavern system with angular structures just like the ones I described, and with artifacts that made no sense, and with a sphere not as active as the Copper Creek one, but with the same strange markings. And when his unit cataloged everything, the government sealed the site, and then destroyed the entire mountain face with explosives, calling it a geological collapse. And he said he had carried the weight of that secrecy for over 30 years, and often wondered if humanity had lost something irreplaceable because of their silence, and that he was no longer certain that burying the truth was the right thing to do. And hearing that shook me, because it proved beyond doubt that the Copper Creek discovery was not the first, and that others had been found and erased long before we stepped into those caverns. And he said Morrison was not wrong to fear government control, because those above them would not reveal the truth to the world, and that they would classify it, restrict it, silence it, and bury it beneath layers of operations and denials for decades. And then Harrison said something that changed everything. He said that leaking the truth to the world would be an act of treason, punishable by prison or worse. Yet he did not tell me to forget the idea. Instead, he calmly laid out what would need to happen if someone decided to do it. And he said, hypothetically, the leak must be coordinated across multiple continents, released to news outlets, scientific institutes, foreign media, and independent researchers all at once, so no single government could contain it. And he said the release must happen after official investigations ended, so no one was watching closely, and that anyone involved would need to vanish for months or years. And he slid a card across the table with a single secure address, saying a friend specialized in helping whistleblowers disappear. And he said if someone needed that type of support, they should contact the address. And I realized he was giving me the tools to shatter the silence he himself had been forced to obey. And when I left his office, I understood that everyone who had ever discovered these hidden civilizations had been given the same choice: bury the truth or carry the burden of releasing it, and that evening I gathered my team and told them what Harrison had revealed, and the room grew still because each of them already wrestled with the same decision, and Reeves asked about the risks, and I told him plainly we could lose our careers, our freedom, and possibly our lives because governments protect certain secrets with extreme force, and Jackson asked what would happen if we stayed silent, and I told him then the truth would die again, and everything learned at Copper Creek would be erased, and Morrison would die in prison as a man condemned for trying to protect humanity. History, and Rodriguez, who had been studying the data nonstop, said he had detected signal patterns across the Appalachian range that matched faint echoes of the heart, suggesting there were more sites, far more than anyone guessed, and that meant others might have been discovered and covered up across decades. And Jackson said he had shown the mineral samples to a friend who confirmed they came from no known geological formation, and Reeves said the symbols on the walls matched no language on Earth, and that with each clue we collected the truth became undeniable. So finally, we drank a single shot of whiskey as soldiers do when facing a line that cannot be uncrossed, and we vowed that the truth would not die this time, and for the next 3 months, we worked in the shadows building a secure network, gathering Morrison data, validating scientific findings, and preparing a coordinated release designed to overwhelm any attempt to suppress it. And we received quiet support from Harrison, who arranged duty assignments that gave us privacy and fed us intelligence about surveillance patterns without ever acknowledging what he was doing. And on the night of the winter solstice, the date chosen for symbolic and tactical reasons, the world would finally learn that human history was far older, more advanced, and more fragile than the textbooks had ever taught. 3 days before the planned release, we scattered across different regions so that no single sweep by federal forces could silence us, because by then we understood completely that once the truth reached daylight, it would not simply shake the world, it would crack the foundations of history and power and belief and fear, and we knew the response would be swift and merciless. So Jackson disappeared into the Tennessee mountains, where he had deep connections among local veterans who trusted him without question, and Rodriguez took an unmarked flight south, then crossed into Iceland, where information freedom laws made it one of the safest places for a day. A leak of this scale, and Reeves vanished into the Canadian wilderness, where a medic with survival training could hide for months if needed, and I stayed behind because the plan required someone visible, someone acting normal, someone who would not raise suspicion until the exact moment the release detonated across the internet. And on December 21st at precisely midnight Greenwich Mean Time, 20 terabytes of Morrison findings burst into the world, hitting servers, newsrooms, universities, research labs, open networks, closed networks, and thousands of independent hosts all at once like a tidal wave no government could contain. And within minutes, photographs of the ancient structures inside Copper Creek began spreading across social platforms, then into major news sites, and then onto television broadcasts. And within hours, debates erupted among scientists who examined the energy readings, the artifact scans, the translations, and the cavern blueprints. And the story became impossible to bury because it had already spread into every corner of the world, and soon reporters demanded access, and governments stumbled through denials, followed by half-truths, followed by stunned silence as more evidence continued to appear. And while the chaos grew, Harrison called me, speaking quickly and urgently, saying they had traced the leak to me, and that federal agents were already on the move, and he ordered me in a voice that sounded more like a brother than a superior to take the car waiting outside my building and flee east toward the Appalachian chain. And he said he did not know anything about any leak, but if he did, he would say that I had done the right thing. And I grabbed my go bag and ran, and as I sped away, I saw dark SUVs swarming my apartment in the rear mirror like predators descending on prey, and I drove deep into the mountains through twisting roads and rising fog until the world behind me vanished, and the world ahead became a maze of ridges older than time. And just when I thought I had lost the pursuit, figures emerged from the trees and signaled me to stop, and I recognized the way they moved with quiet discipline and deliberate caution, and they were Morrison's scattered people, the ones who had escaped the federal sweep. And they nodded silently and guided me off the road and into the forest, leading me through hidden paths that only locals and ghosts would know. And finally, they brought me to an entrance carved naturally into the base of a ridge, leading into a deeper site revealed by Morrison before his arrest, a place older than Copper Creek, older even than the site Harrison had seen in 1987, and inside I walked beneath towering passages covered in symbols more intricate than anything I had seen in the earlier chambers. And as we moved deeper into the mountain, the walls opened into vast halls, lit only by faint reflections from crystalline veins embedded in the rock. And some areas held echoes of collapsed structures, while others remained perfectly preserved as if untouched by time. And one of Morrison's followers said these deeper sections were the true cities of the ancients, while Copper Creek and similar sites were only surface-level annexes meant for study, storage, or ritual. And another said the warnings carved into these chambers repeated the same cycle: rise, fall, silence, rebirth, as if the ancients believed destruction was not random but inevitable unless future generations learned the truth. And when I asked what they expected me to do now that truth was out, they said humanity would not accept this discovery easily, and governments would attempt to regain control, but they also said the evidence was too widely released for suppression to succeed, and that independent scientists were already forming expeditions to verify the sites, and that some truths once born could not be killed. And they told me my place was here in the mountains as a guardian and a witness, someone who had lived the story firsthand and could help decode the deeper passages and preserve the knowledge for future generations. And 6 months passed like shifting seasons. And in that time, the world transformed slowly but permanently as global institutions tried to understand the implications of the discovery. And some resisted calling it a hoax until undeniable proof surfaced, and others embraced the revelation as a long-hidden chapter of human history. And Morrison was eventually released, not cleared but freed under public pressure, because no jury wanted to condemn the man who had risked everything to protect humanity. Greatest archaeological find, and Rodriguez emerged from Iceland as a champion of information, freedom, and Reeves returned from Canada to share medical insights about the physiological effects of exposure to the caverns. And Jackson never left the mountains, choosing instead to remain close to the ancient sites, working with locals and Morrison people to monitor new discoveries. And as for me, I stayed within the Appalachian heartland, joining a growing network of researchers, veterans, explorers, and scientists drawn from around the world, all working together to map the deeper cities and decode the ancient language and uncover the meanings behind the repeating warnings carved into the stone. And together we found star maps etched into cavern ceilings showing Earth position in the galaxy. At times, no human civilization should have understood, and discovered tools that manipulated stone like liquid and devices that responded to thought waves rather than touch. And in every chamber, we found the same repeating symbols: rise, peak, catastrophe, fall, as if the ancients had lived through cycles so immense that our entire modern age was only a small ripple in a repeating pattern. And Morrison said the ancients were trying to teach us how to break the cycle, how to survive what destroyed them. And sometimes when he said this, I felt fear, because the idea of repeating an ancient catastrophe felt too heavy for any one generation to bear. And yet, when I stood inside those colossal halls older than written language, I felt hope, because the ancients had left their warnings, their knowledge, their struggles carved into stone, so someone someday might understand and change humanity's fate. And now that the truth was finally free, I believed we had a chance to do exactly that, because the mountains were no longer silent, they were speaking. And for the first time in thousands of years, humanity was finally listening. Outro. And that is how the mountain truth finally broke free, and how a buried world rose again from darkness, and how a handful of soldiers and forgotten veterans changed the future of an entire nation without firing a single shot. Some secrets deserve to stay sealed, but some secrets burn so bright they carve their way back into daylight, no matter who tries to bury them. The Appalachians are awake now, the world is awake now, and the story is only beginning. If you want more tales from the edges of the unknown, more missions that were never meant to be spoken, more dark whispers from the places where maps end, then stay right here. Hit that follow, hit that subscribe. Join the Rebel crew. We go deeper than anyone else dares to go, and we never stop until the truth stands tall in the open.